Part 3: International Trade and Business Cycles. Chapter 1: On Foreign Trade. Abstract. Here the circular flow economy is extended to international trade. Instead of barter or exchange with money, Cantillon explains how international trade takes place on the basis of bills of exchange. He shows that a state which accumulates money will enjoy a temporary gain in international trade, but that states where manufacturing industries develop will enjoy a higher standard of living. The only clear exception Cantillon makes to free trade is his famous endorsement of the English Navigation Acts, where domestic shipping is protected, not in its own right, but to provide ships and sailors during wartime. When a state exchanges a small product of land for a larger in foreign trade, it seems to have the advantage, and if money is more abundant than abroad, it will always exchange a smaller product of land for a greater one. When the state exchanges its labor for foreign products, it seems to have the advantage, because its inhabitants are fed at the foreigner's expense. When a state exchanges products and labor for a larger amount of foreign products that require an equal or greater amount of labor, it seems again to have the advantage. If the ladies of Paris annually consume lace from Brussels valued at 100,000 ounces of silver, it will require a quarter of an acre of land in Brabant to grow the 150 pounds of flax necessary to make the fine lace in Brussels. It will require the labor of approximately 2,000 people in Brabant during the year for the several tasks involved, from the sewing of the flax to the final perfection of the lace. The lace merchant or entrepreneur in Brussels will advance the capital. He will, directly or indirectly, pay all the spinners and lace makers, and a portion of the labor of those who make their tools. All those who have taken part in the work will then buy, directly or indirectly, their sustenance from the farmer in Brabant, who will use the money to cover part of his rent to the property owner. In this economy, if one estimates that these 2,000 persons need 3 acres of land per capita for their maintenance, as well as that of their families, then 6,000 acres of land in Brabant will be required to support those who have worked on the lace at the expense of the ladies in Paris who will buy and wear the lace. The ladies of Paris will pay the 100,000 ounces of silver, each according to the quantity of lace she has bought. All this silver must be sent to Brussels in specie, less only the cost of shipping. The entrepreneur in Brussels must find that it not only pays all of his advances and the interest on the money that he has perhaps borrowed, but also a profit for his enterprise and the upkeep of his family. If the price paid by the ladies for the lace does not cover all the costs and profits, there will be no incentive for this business, and the entrepreneurs will cease production or become bankrupt. However, if we assume that this manufacturing continues, all costs must be covered by the prices paid by the ladies of Paris, and that 100,000 ounces of silver must be sent to Brussels, if the people of Brabant receive no commodities from France as compensation. However, if the inhabitants of Brabant are fond of champagne wine and consume 100,000 ounces of silver worth of wine every year, the wine products will compensate for the lace, and the balance of trade for these two branches will be equal. This compensation and circulation will be achieved through entrepreneurs and bankers who will participate in this trade. The ladies in Paris will pay 100,000 ounces to whoever sells and delivers the lace to them. The seller will then give the money to a banker who, in exchange, will give him one or more bills of exchange, redeemable by the institution's correspondent bank in Brussels. The Paris banker will then give the money to the champagne wine merchants who have accumulated 100,000 ounces of silver in the Brussels bank. In return, the wine merchants give the Paris bank their bills of exchange, of the same amount, to be redeemed from their account with the correspondent bank in Brussels. Thus, the 100,000 ounces paid for the champagne wine in Brussels will compensate for the 100,000 ounces paid for the lace in Paris. And in this way, the trouble of sending to Brussels the money acquired in Paris, and to Paris the money acquired in Brussels, will be avoided. This compensation is achieved by using bills of exchange, the nature of which I will try to explain in the next chapter. From this example, we can see that the 100,000 ounces paid by the ladies of Paris for lace comes into the hands of the merchants who send champagne wine to Brussels, and that the 100,000 ounces consumers paid for the champagne wine in Brussels comes into the hands of lace merchants. The entrepreneurs on each side distribute this money to those who work for them, either in the wine or the lace business. It is clear from this example that the ladies in Paris support and maintain all those who produce the lace in Brabant and that they cause money to circulate there. It is also clear that the consumers of Champagne wine in Brussels support and maintain in Champagne not only the winemakers and others who work in the production of the wine, but also the wagon makers, blacksmiths, and wagon drivers, etc., who take part in its transport as well as the horses they use. They also pay for the value of the land used to produce the wine and cause a circulation of money in Champagne. However, this circulation or trade in Champagne, which is so stimulating and which maintains the winemaker, the farmer, the wagon makers, blacksmiths, and wagon drivers, etc., and which pays the rent of the vineyard owner as well as that of the owner of the pastures that serve to feed the wagon horses, is, in the present case, an expensive and disadvantageous trade for France when taking the effects it produces into consideration. If a barrel of wine sells for 60 ounces of silver in Brussels, and if we assume that 1 acre of vineyard produces 4 barrels, the production of 4,166.5 acres of land must be sent to Brussels to equal 100,000 ounces of silver, and about 2,000 acres of pasture and cropland must be employed for the hay and oats consumed by the wagon horses, if they are solely used for this purpose year-round. Therefore, approximately 6,000 acres of land will be relinquished from the subsistence of Frenchmen, and the people of Brabant will gain the production of over 4,000 acres, since the champagne wine they drink saves them more than 4,000 acres of land they would likely use to produce beer if they did not consume wine. However, the lace used to pay for all this cost the people of Brabant only 1/4 of an acre of flax. Therefore, with the production of 1 acre, combined with their labor, the people of Brabant buy more than 16,000 acres worth, combined with less labor, from the French. They obtain an increase in subsistence and only give an article of luxury, which brings no real advantage to France since the lace is worn and consumed and cannot be exchanged for anything useful afterward. Following the rule of intrinsic values, the land used in Champagne for wine production, the maintenance of the winemakers, the coopers, the wagon makers, blacksmiths, wagon drivers, horses, etc., ought to equal the land used in Brabant for the production of the flax, the support of the spinners and lace makers, and all those who have taken part in the production of the lace. But if money in circulation is more abundant in Brabant than Champagne, land and labor will be at higher prices there, and as a result of the valuation in terms of money that takes place on both sides, the French will lose even more. In this example, we see a branch of trade that strengthens the foreigner, lessens the number of inhabitants in the state, and without causing any money in circulation to leave, weakens the same state. I've chosen this example to better show how one state may be the dupe of another in trade, and to show the method of judging the advantages and disadvantages of foreign trade. It is by the examination of the effects of each particular branch of commerce that foreign trade can be usefully regulated. It cannot be distinctly known with generalizations. One will always find when examining particular cases that the exportation of any manufactured goods is advantageous to the state because the foreigner always pays and supports workers who are useful to the state. The best returns or payments which one receives are in specie, and in default of specie, foreign products that require less labor. By these trading methods, states that have very little raw materials can support a large number of inhabitants at the expense of foreigners, and large states can maintain their inhabitants in greater ease and abundance. Great states have no need to increase the number of their inhabitants. They only need to support their citizens with domestic production and in more ease and comfort, and to increase the strength of the state in terms of defense and security. To achieve the same result by foreign trade, the exportation of the state's products and manufactured goods must be strongly encouraged, and exchanged as often as possible for gold and silver. If an abundant harvest creates a surplus of production in the state above the usual annual consumption, it would be advantageous to encourage its exportation in return for its value in gold and silver. These metals are non-perishable, they do not spoil like agricultural products, and gold and silver can always be used to import into the state what it does not have. However, it would not be advantageous for the state to annually send great quantities of its agricultural products abroad in return for foreign manufactured goods. This would both weaken and decrease the number of inhabitants and the armed forces of the state. It is not my intention to describe the branches of trade that should be encouraged for the good of the state. I'll simply say that the importation of money should be the goal. An increase in the quantity of money circulating in a state provides great advantages in foreign trade, so long as this abundance of money lasts. This allows the state to exchange a small quantity of products and labor for a greater one. It levies its taxes more easily and finds no difficulty in raising money in case of public need. It is true that the continued increase of money will in time and by its abundance cause land and labor costs to rise in the state. Products and manufactured goods will in the long run cost so much that the foreigner will gradually cease to buy them and will adjust to buying them cheaper elsewhere. By imperceptible degrees, this will ruin the businesses and manufactures of the state. This same cause, the abundance of money, will raise the rents of property owners and will put them into the habit of importing many articles from foreign countries where they can be purchased for less. These are natural consequences. The wealth acquired by a state through trade, labor, and economy will gradually plunge it into luxury. States that rise by trade do not fail to sink afterwards. There are steps that might be, but are not, taken to stop this decline. But it is always true that when the state has a positive balance of trade and an abundance of money, it seems powerful, and it really is as long as this abundance continues. Infinite inductions could be added to justify these ideas of foreign trade and the advantages of abundant money. The disproportion of money in circulation in England and in China is astonishing. Despite an 18-month sea voyage, goods from the Indies like silks, colored calicos, muslins, etc. sell for a very low price in England and could be paid for with the 30th part of her articles and goods if the Indians would buy them. But they are not so foolish as to pay extravagant prices for our products while work is done better and infinitely cheaper in their own country. So they sell us their goods only for cash money, which we annually carry to them, increasing their wealth and diminishing our own. Indian goods consumed in Europe only reduce our money and the work done by our own manufacturers. A Native American who sells beaver skins to a European is surprised, and rightly so, to learn that woolen hats are as good as those made of beaver, and that all the difference, which causes so long a sea journey, is in the mind of those who think that the beaver hats are lighter and more pleasant to the eye and touch. However, as these beaver skins are ordinarily paid for to the American in articles of iron, steel, etc., and not in money, this trade is not injurious to Europe, especially since it supports workers and particularly sailors who are very useful to the state, while the commerce of goods from the East Indies exports money and diminishes the number of workers in Europe. It must be acknowledged that the East Indian trade is profitable to the Dutch Republic, and that she makes the loss fall on the rest of Europe by selling the spices and goods in Germany, Italy, Spain, and the New World, for a profit well beyond the amount she sends to the Indies. Holland even finds it useful to clothe her women and other inhabitants with Indian fabrics rather than with English or French fabrics. It suits the Dutch better to enrich the Indians rather than their neighbors, who could use it to oppress them. Moreover, they sell the cloths and manufactured goods that they produce to other Europeans for more than what they pay for the Indian goods consumed in Holland. England and France would be mistaken to imitate the Dutch in this respect. These kingdoms have the means to clothe their women with their own product, and though their fabrics are more expensive than Indian-made ones, they should prevent their people from wearing foreign fabrics. They ought to prevent a reduction of their own articles and goods and not become dependent on the foreigner, still less allow their money to be taken away for that purpose. But as the Dutch find means to sell Indian goods in the other states of Europe, English and French should do the same, whether to reduce Holland's naval power or to increase their own, and above all, to do without Holland's aid in the branches of consumption that a bad habit has made necessary in these kingdoms. It is a visible disadvantage to allow the wearing of Indian fabrics in the kingdom of Europe that have the means to clothe their people with their own products. Just as it is disadvantageous for a state to encourage foreign manufactures, so it is also to encourage foreign navigation. When a state sends its articles and goods abroad, it can obtain the full advantage if it sends them in its own ships. This way, trade supports a large number of sailors who are as useful to the state as workers. If it leaves ocean transportation to foreign vessels, it strengthens foreign navies and weakens its own. Navigation is an essential aspect of foreign trade. In all of Europe, the Dutch are those who build ships the cheapest. In addition to the rivers that they use to float timber downstream, their proximity to the north supplies them with less expensive masts, wood, pitch, rope, etc. Their mills for sawing wood facilitate the production. In addition, they navigate with smaller crews, and their sailors live very cheaply. One of their windmills for sawing wood saves the labor of 80 men a day. With these advantages, they would be the only sea carriers in Europe if cost alone mattered. And if they had enough resources to develop an extensive commerce, they would doubtless have the most flourishing merchant marine in Europe. However, their large number of sailors is not sufficient to make them a superior naval power because their state lacks internal strength. Even if they had the large revenues necessary to build and man war vessels, they would not do so because they profit from the expansion of trade. In order to prevent the Dutch, with their low-cost advantage, from expanding their shipping business, England has forbidden any nation from importing goods that it did not produce. This precludes the Dutch from shipping to England and thereby strengthens the English shipping business. The English do ship at a greater cost than the Dutch, but the wealth of their overseas cargoes offsets some of these costs. France and Spain are maritime states that have a large part of their production sent to the north, from which they also acquire goods and merchandise. It is not surprising that their navies are insignificant in proportion to their production and the extent of their costs, since they leave it to foreign vessels to import all the goods they receive from the north and to export the goods they send to northern states. These states, France and Spain, do not take advantageous trade considerations into account in their policy. Most merchants in France and Spain who deal in foreign trade are usually the agents or clerks of foreign merchants and are not entrepreneurs carrying on trade with their own funds. It is true that northern states, by their location and proximity to countries that produce all that is needed for shipbuilding, are in a position to transport everything cheaper than France and Spain. However, this should not prevent these two kingdoms from taking steps to strengthen their shipping. England has long shown them the example. They have at home and in their colonies all that is needed for the construction of ships, and it would not be difficult to get ships built there. There are a variety of methods that could be used to make such a policy successful if the legislature or State Department would work towards that goal. My subject does not allow me in this essay to examine these methods in detail. I will simply say that in countries where trade does not support a large number of ships and sailors, it is almost impossible for the prince to maintain a flourishing navy without ruining the state treasury with large expenditures. I will conclude by pointing out that the most important form of trade for the increase or decrease of a state's power is foreign trade. The domestic trade is not equally important politically. Foreign trade is only half-heartedly supported when attention is not paid to increasing and maintaining large merchants who are natives of the country, ships, sailors, workers, and manufacturers. Above all, a balance of trade must be maintained against the foreigner. Chapter 2. On Bills of Exchanges and Their Nature. Abstract. There is an expense associated with transporting money based on the distance, risks, and other transaction costs. Bills of exchange are a type of contract that can reduce this cost by avoiding shipments that are offsetting between two locations. When money must be sent, bankers charge a fee for arranging the shipment and providing their customers with a bill of exchange, or check, that can be drawn or cashed at a correspondent bank where the money is sent. When the exchange rate is above par, it indicates a balance of payments deficit, and when the exchange rate is below par, it indicates a balance of payments surplus. In the city of Paris, transporting money from one place to another usually costs 5 sols per bag of 1,000 livres. If it were necessary to carry it from the Faubourg Saint-Ouen to the Invalides, it would cost more than twice as much, and if there was no generally trustworthy money couriers, it would cost even more. If there were likely to be robbers on the road, the money would be sent in large amounts with an escort at greater cost, and when someone bears the cost and risks of transport, he will require payment in proportion to these costs and risks. Therefore, the cost of transport from Rouen to Paris and from Paris to Rouen generally amounts to 50 sols per bag of 1,000 livres, which, in the language of the bankers, is 1/4%. Bankers generally send money in strong boxes, which robbers have difficulty taking because of the iron and the weight, and as there are always mail coaches on this route, the costs are negligible on large sums sent between these two places. Assume that every year the city of Chalon-sur-Marne pays 10,000 ounces of silver to the king's tax collector, and wine merchants from Chalon and the surrounding areas sell to Paris, through their distributors, champagne wine for a total of 10,000 ounces of silver. If the ounce of silver is worth 5 livres in France, the 10,000 ounces in question will be worth 50,000 livres in both Paris and Chalon. The tax collector in this example has 50,000 livres to send to Paris, and the distributors have 50,000 livres to send to Chalon wine merchants. This double transaction or transport may be avoided by an exchange contract known as bills of exchange, if the parties get together and arrange for it. In this example, let each wine distributor take his portion of the 50,000 livres to the cashier of the tax collector's office in Paris, and in return he will be given a check or bill of exchange payable to the Chalon tax collector. When these checks are endorsed and transferred to the Chalon tax office, the tax obligations of the Chalon wine merchants of 50,000 livres will be paid. In this manner, the 50,000 livres in Paris will be paid to the cashier of the tax department in Paris, and the wine merchants of Chalon will, in effect, be paid, and by this exchange or offset, the trouble of sending this money from one city to the other is avoided. Or else, let Chalon wine merchants who have 50,000 livres in Paris offer bills of exchange from their distributors to their tax collector and endorse them to the cashier of the tax office in Paris, who will in turn collect from the distributors the amount of 50,000 livres which they owe to the merchants of Chalon for the bills of exchange. Whichever way this offsetting is achieved, whether the bills of exchange are drawn from Paris or Chalon, as in this example from Chalon on Paris, ounce for ounce or 50,000 livres for 50,000 livres is paid, and the exchange is said to be at par. The same method might be adopted between Chalon wine merchants and the rent collector for the nobility in Paris who own land in the Chalon district, and the wine merchants or other merchants in Chalon who have sent goods or merchandise to Paris and have money there, and other merchants who have purchased goods from Paris and sold them in Chalon. If there is a large trade between these two cities, bankers will set up in Paris and Chalon. They will enter into relationship with the interested parties on both sides and will become the agents or intermediaries for the payments that would otherwise have to be sent from one city to the other. Now, if all the wine and other goods and merchandise which have been sent from Chalon to Paris and have actually been sold there for cash exceed in value the total receipts of the taxes in Chalon, plus the rents from Paris nobility owning property in the Chalon district, as well as the value of the goods and merchandise sent to Paris to Chalon and sold there for cash, by 5,000 ounces of silver, or 25,000 livres. It will be necessary for the banker in Paris to send this amount to Chalon in cash. This sum will be the excess or balance of trade between these two cities. The sum must be sent to Chalon in cash, and this operation will be carried out in the following way, or in some similar fashion. The agents or distributors of the Chalon wine merchants and others who have sent goods or merchandise to Paris have money from these sales in Paris, and that must be sent to Chalon. They are not in the habit of transporting the money, at risk, and will go to the tax office's cashier to obtain a check or bill of exchange, generally at par, for the tax office in Chalon up to the amount which it has available in Chalon. If they need to send additional sums to Chalon, they will go to the banker who has, at his disposal, the rents of the Paris nobility who owns estates in that district. This banker will furnish them, like the tax office's cashier, with bills of exchange to be cashed with his correspondent banker in Chalon, up to the amount which he has at his disposal, and that must otherwise be sent from Chalon to Paris. This offsetting will also be made at par between the agents who request that their money be sent to Chalon, as well as from the nobility who ask to have their money brought to Paris from Chalon, unless the banker tries to make a small profit from the transaction for his trouble. If the banker also has at his disposal money in Chalon from the sale of the merchandise imported from Paris, he will also furnish bills of exchange for this amount. However, in our example, the agents for the Chalon merchants still have 25,000 livres in Paris, which they must send to Chalon in addition to all the sums mentioned above. If they offer this money to the tax office's cashier, he will reply that he has no more funds in Cantillon and that he cannot supply them with bills of exchange or checks to that city. If they offer the money to the banker, he will tell them that he has no more funds in Cantillon from which he can draw, but if they will pay him 3% of the exchange, he will provide a bill of exchange. They will offer 1 or 2% and will settle at 2.5%, unable to do better. At this price, the banker will give them bills of exchange. That is, if they pay him 2 livres 10 sols in Paris, he will supply a bill of exchange for 100 livres to be cashed by his correspondent bank in Cantillon, payable in 10 or 15 days, so as to put his correspondent in a position to make the 25,000 livres payment he is obtaining from him. At this rate of exchange, he will send him the money by messenger or stagecoach in gold or, in absence of gold, in silver. This delivery of gold will cost 10 livres for each bag of 1,000 livres, or in banker's jargon, 1%. He will pay his correspondent in Cantillon a commission of 5 livres per bag of 1,000 livres, or 1%, and he will keep 1% for his own profit. On this basis, the exchange between Paris and Cantillon is at 2.5% above par, because one pays 2 livres 10 sols for every 100 livres exchanged. In a similar manner, the balance of trade is transported from one city to the other through bankers, and generally on a large scale. Not all those who bear the name of bankers are accustomed to these transactions, and many of them deal only in commissions and bank speculations. I will only count among bankers those who transmit money. They are the people who regulate such exchanges, where the price is based on the costs and risks of transporting currencies in different cases. The exchange premium between Paris and Cantillon is rarely more than 2.5% or 3% over or under par. But from Paris to Amsterdam, the exchange premium will be up to 5 or 6% when currencies have to be sent. The journey is longer, the risk is greater, and more correspondents and commission agents are involved. From India to England, the price for transport will be 10 to 12%. From London to Amsterdam, the exchange premium will hardly exceed 2% in times of peace. In our present example, it could be said that the exchange in Paris for Cantillon is 2.5% above par, and in Cantillon it could be said that the exchange for Paris is 2.5% below par. Because in these circumstances, those who provide money in Cantillon for a bill of exchange for Paris will only give 97 livres 10 sols to receive 100 livres in Paris. And it is evident that the city or place where the exchange is above par is in debt to that where it is below par, as long as the exchange premiums continue on this basis. Exchanging money from Paris to Cantillon is 2.5% above par, because Paris is in debt to Cantillon, and the money for this debt must be transported from Paris to Cantillon. This is why when the exchange premium is commonly below par in one city as compared with another, it may be concluded that this first city has a balance of trade with the other. When the exchange premium in Madrid or Lisbon is above par for all other countries, it shows that these two capitals must send specie to these other countries. In all places and cities that use the same money and the same gold and silver specie like Paris and Chalon-sur-Marne, or London and Bristol, the exchange premium is known and expressed by giving and taking a certain percentage above or below par. When 98 livres are paid in one place to receive 100 livres in another, it is said that exchange premium is about 2% below par. When 102 livres are paid in one place to receive only 100 livres in another, it is said that the exchange premium is exactly 2% above par. When 100 livres are given in one place for 100 livres in another, it is said that the exchange is at par. There is no difficulty or mystery in all this. When the regulation of exchange occurs between two cities or places where the money is different, where the coins have different sizes, fineness, forms, and names, the nature of exchange seems at first more difficult to explain, though in reality this exchange differs from that between Paris and Cantillon only in the jargon used by bankers. In Paris, one speaks of the Dutch exchange premium by reckoning the écu, equal to 3 livres, against so many Dutch deniers, but the parity of exchange between Paris and Amsterdam is always 100 ounces of gold or silver against 100 ounces of gold or silver of the same weight and fineness. 102 ounces paid in Paris to receive 100 ounces in Amsterdam always comes to 2% above par. The banker who transports the balance of trade must always know how to calculate parity. But in the language of foreign exchange, the price of exchange in London with Amsterdam is made by giving a pound sterling in London to receive 35 escalin at a Dutch bank, with Paris by giving 30 deniers or pence sterling in London to receive 1 écu or 3 livres tournois in Paris. This way of speaking does not reveal whether exchange is above or below par, but the banker who transmits the balance of trade understands it and knows how much foreign money he will receive for specie of his own country, which he is transporting. Whether we fix the exchange premium in London for English silver, in rubles for Moscow, in marks for Hamburg, in Rixdollars from Germany, in livres from Flanders, in ducat from Venice, in piastre from Genoa or Leghorn, in milrei or crusadores from Portugal, in pieces of 8 from Spain or pistoles, etc. The parity of exchange for all these countries will be always 100 ounces of gold or silver against 100 ounces. And if, in the language of exchange, one gives more or less than this parity, it is the same as saying that the exchange is so much above or below par, and we will always know whether or not England owes a balance to the place with which the exchange is settled, just as we know in our example between Paris and Chalon. Chalon wineries sell 30,000 ounces of silver worth of wine to the people of Paris, who in turn sell the people of Chalon 5,000 ounces of goods. Of the 30,000 ounces on account in Paris, 5,000 ounces are transferred to the merchants who sold goods to the people of Chalon. 10,000 is transferred to the government to pay the taxes for the people of Chalon, and 10,000 ounces are transferred to the property owners living in Paris to pay the rents they are owed. All this is done by the use of bills of exchange. The remaining 5,000 ounces must be paid in silver, which must be physically moved from Paris to Chalon. Chalon has a balance of trade, and Paris owes a balance of trade. The banker gives bills of exchange to the wine merchants for the 2.5% fee, who in turn sends them to the winery owners, who can then cash them at local banks after the silver arrives from Paris. Chapter 3. Further explanation on the nature of exchanges. Abstract. Exchange rates are explained as a function of the balance of trade and other factors. A trade deficit can cause your money to exchange below par, while a trade surplus will cause it to exchange above par. In fact, the exchange rate above and below par is an indicator of the general balance of trade in a country. An attempt to prohibit the export of gold necessary to pay for deficits only hurts the economy. We have seen that exchanges are regulated by the intrinsic value of specie, i.e. at par, and that their variation arises from the costs and risks of transporting money from one place to another when a balance of trade has to be sent in specie. There is no need for reasoning with something we can observe in fact and practice. Bankers sometimes introduce refinements into this practice. If England owes France 100,000 ounces of silver for the balance of trade, if France owes 100,000 ounces to Holland, and Holland 100,000 ounces to England, these three amounts may be offset by bills of exchange between the respective bankers of these three states, without the need to send any silver on any side. If Holland sends goods worth 100,000 ounces of silver to England in January, and England only sends goods worth 50,000 ounces to Holland during the same month, I'm assuming that the sale and payment are made in January on both sides, a balance of trade of 50,000 ounces will be due to Holland, and the exchange rate with Amsterdam, in January, will be 2 or 3% above par in London. Or in the language of exchange, the exchange rate with Holland, which was at par or at 35 escalins to the pound sterling in London in December, will rise to about 36 escalin in January. However, after the bankers send this balance of 50,000 ounces to Holland, the exchange rate with Amsterdam will naturally fall back to par in London or to 35 escalin. However, an English banker may foresee in January, if an extraordinary quantity of goods is being sent to Holland, that Holland will owe a considerable amount to England at the time of payment in March. Instead of sending the 50,000 écu or ounces due to Holland in January, he may provide bills of exchange on his Amsterdam correspondent bank that will be payable 2 months later. By this method, he will profit on the exchange, which was above par in January, and will be below par in March, and gain doubly without sending a sol to Holland. This is what bankers call speculations, which often cause variations in the exchange rates for short periods of time, independently of the balance of trade. In the long run, however, we must return to this balance which makes the rules of exchange constant and uniform. And though the speculations and credits of bankers may sometimes delay the transport of the sums that one city or state owes to another, in the end, it is always necessary to pay the debt and send the balance of trade in specie to the place where it is due. If England regularly gains a balance of trade with Portugal and always loses a balance with Holland, the exchange rate premium between Holland and Portugal will make this evident. In London, the exchange rate with Lisbon will be below par as Portugal is in debt to England. It will also be evident that the exchange rate with Amsterdam is above par because England is in debt to Holland. However, the amount of debt cannot be seen from the exchange rates. It cannot be seen whether the balance of silver withdrawn from Portugal will be greater or less than what has to be sent to Holland. However, there is one thing which will always be apparent in London, whether England gains or loses the general balance of her trade. The general balance should be understood as the net balance between England and all the foreign states with trade with her. As seen in the price of gold and silver, but especially of gold, now that the proportion between gold and silver in coin money differs from the market rate, as will be explained in the next chapter. If the price of gold in the London market, which is the center of English trade, is lower than the price at the Tower, where guineas or gold coins are minted, or at the same price as these coins intrinsically, and if gold is taken to the Tower in exchange for their value in guineas or minted coins, it is a certain proof that England is a gainer in the general balance of her trade. It proves that the gold taken from Portugal suffices not only to pay the balance which England sends into Holland, Sweden, Muscovy, and the other states where she is indebted, but that there remains some gold to be sent to the mint, and the amount or sum of this general balance of trade is known from the amount of specie coined at the Tower of London. But if gold is sold in the London market above the Tower price, which is usually £3.18.0 an ounce, the metal will no longer be taken to the mint, and this is a certain sign that not enough gold is being received from abroad, from Portugal for instance, compared to the amount necessary to send to other countries that England is in debt to. This is proof that the general balance of trade is against England. However, this would not be known except for the prohibition in England against sending gold coins out of the country. This prohibition is the reason why the timid London bankers prefer to buy gold metal, which they are allowed to send abroad, at £3.18.0 up to £4 an ounce for export rather than sending out guineas or gold coins at £3.18.0 illegally at the risk of confiscation. Some of them take this risk, others melt the gold coins to send out as bullion, so that it is impossible to judge how much gold England loses when the general balance of trade is against her. In France, they deduct the cost of minting, which is usually 1.5%. In other words, the price for coins is always higher than that of uncoined metal. To know whether France loses in the general balance of her trade, one only needs to know whether bankers send French coins abroad. If they do so, it is a proof they cannot purchase enough bullion to export, since the bullion, though at a lower price than coined money in France, is of greater value than these coins in foreign countries by at least 1.5%. Exchange rates rarely diverge from the balance of trade between one country and all others, and this balance is merely the difference in value between the commodities and merchandise which a state sends to other countries and receives from them. Yet, there are often circumstances and incidental causes for which considerable sums are conveyed from one state to another, aside from the question of merchandise or trade, and these causes affect the exchange rates just as the balance of trade would do. The sums of money which one state sends into another for its secret services and political purposes, subsidies to allies, the upkeep of troops, ambassadors, noblemen who travel, etc., the capital which the inhabitants of one state send to another to invest in public or private projects, the interest which these inhabitants receive annually from such investments, etc., are all of this nature. The exchange rates fluctuate with all these incidental causes and follow the same rule as the transportation of money. In considering the balance of trade, matters of this kind are not separated, and indeed it would be very difficult to separate them. They have most certainly an influence on the increase and decrease of money circulating in a state and on its comparative strength and power. My subject does not allow me to further develop the effects of these incidental causes. I confine myself always to the simple views of commerce so as to not complicate my subject, which is already complex by the multiplicity of related facts. Exchange rates rise more or less above par in proportion to the greater or smaller cost and risks of transporting money. That being said, they naturally rise much more above par in cities or states where it is forbidden to export money than in those where its export is free. Assume that Portugal annually consumes considerable quantities of woolen and other manufactured goods from England for its own people as well as for those of Brazil. It pays for them partly in wine, oils, etc., but for the surplus payment, there is a regular balance of trade sent from Lisbon to London. If the King of Portugal strictly prohibits under penalty not only of confiscation, but also of life, the transport of any gold or silver out of his states, the terror of his prohibition will, in the first place, stop the bankers from sending the balance. The money for English manufactures will be kept in Lisbon. English merchants, unable to receive payments from Lisbon, will stop sending cloth there. The result will be that cloth will become extraordinarily expensive. Though their price has not gone up in England, they cease to be sent to Lisbon because their value cannot be recovered. In order to have these cloths, the Portuguese nobility, and others who cannot do without them, will offer twice the usual price, but as they cannot get enough of them without sending money out of Portugal, the increased price of cloth will become the profit of anyone who, in spite of the prohibition, will export gold or silver. This will encourage various Jews and others to take gold and silver to English vessels in the port of Lisbon, even at the risk of their lives. At first, they will gain 50 to 100% in this traffic, and this profit is paid by the Portuguese in the high price they give for the cloth. They will gradually familiarize themselves with this maneuver, after having often practiced it successfully, and eventually, money will be put on board English ships for a payment of 1 to 2%. The King of Portugal lays down the law or prohibition. His subjects, even his courtiers, pay the cost of the risk run to circumvent and elude it. Therefore, no advantage is gained by such a law. On the contrary, it causes a real loss to Portugal since more of the state's money is sent abroad than if there were no such law. Those who gain by this maneuver, whether Jews or others, often send their profits abroad, and when they have enough of them, or when they get scared, they often follow their money abroad. If some of these lawbreakers were caught in the act, their goods confiscated and their lives taken, these events, instead of stopping the export of money, would only increase it, because those who formerly were satisfied with 1 or 2% for exporting money will ask 20 or 50%, and so the export must always go on to pay the balance. I do not know whether I have succeeded in making these reasons clear to those who have no knowledge of trade. I know that for those who understand exchange rates, nothing is easier to comprehend, and they are rightly astonished that those who govern states and administer the finances of great kingdoms have so little knowledge of the nature of exchange rates as to forbid the export of bullion and coins of gold and silver. The only way to keep them in a state is to conduct foreign trade so that the balance is not adverse to the state. Chapter 4. The variations in the proportion of values with regard to the metals used as money. Abstract. The price of gold and silver and the ratio between them is determined by markets and is also based on their usefulness, cost of production, and transportation costs. When government mints established a fixed ratio between gold and silver money that is not based on market prices, the overvalued metal will be driven from circulation. This is commonly referred to as Gresham's law, where bad money drives out good money. If metals were found as easily as water commonly is, everyone would take what he wanted and they would hardly have any value. The most abundant metals that cost the least to produce are also the cheapest. Iron seems the most necessary, but as it is commonly found in Europe and produced with less trouble and labor than copper, it is much cheaper. Copper, silver, and gold are the 3 metals generally used as money. Copper mines are the most abundant and cost less in land and labor to produce. The richest copper mines today are in Sweden, and more than 80 ounces of copper are needed there to pay for an ounce of silver. It is also to be observed that the copper extracted from some mines is more perfect and lustrous than what is obtained from others. The copper of Japan and Sweden is brighter than that of England. That of Spain was, in the time of the Romans, better than that of Cyprus. But gold and silver, regardless of where they are extracted, are always of the same perfection when refined. The value of copper, as with everything else, is proportional to the land and labor which enter into its production. Besides the ordinary uses to which it is put, like pots and pans, kitchen utensils, locks, etc., copper is used as money in most states for small purchases. In Sweden, it is even used in large payments when silver is scarce. During the first 5 centuries of Rome, it was the only money. Silver only began to be employed in exchange in the year of Rome, or AUC, 484, 269 BC. The ratio of copper to silver was then rated in the mints at 72 to 1. In the coinage of 512, 241 BC, at 80 to 1. In 537, 216 BC, 64 to 1. In 586, 167 BC, at 48 to 1. In 663, 90 BC, by Drusus, and 672, 81 BC, by Sulla, at 53 to 1. In 712, 42 BC, by Marcus Antonius, and 724, 30 BC, by Augustus, at 56 to 1. In 54 AD under Nero at 60 to 1. In 160 AD under Antonius at 64 to 1. In the time of Constantine, 330 AD, at 120 and 125 to 1. In the age of Justinian, about 550 AD, at 100 to 1. Since then, it has always varied below the ratio of 100 to 1 in the European mints. Today, because copper is only used as money for small purchases, whether alloyed with carbon to make brass as in England, or with a small portion of silver as in France and Germany, it is generally related in the proportion of 40 to 1. Though the market price of copper to that of silver is ordinarily at 80 or 100 to 1. The reason is that the cost of coining is generally deducted from the weight of copper. When there is not too much of this small money in circulation for small transactions in the state, coins of copper or copper and alloy are used without difficulty in spite of their defect in intrinsic value. However, when being used for exchanges with a foreign country, they will only be taken for the weight of the copper and the silver alloy. Even in states where there is too much copper in circulation for small transactions, when the greed or ignorance of the governors mandate laws that require a certain amount to be received in large payments, it is unwillingly accepted. Small coins lose a certain percentage when traded for silver, as is the case with Billion coins and Ardites in Spain, or when they are used for large payments. Yet small coins can always be used without difficulty for small purchases because the value of the payments is small, and therefore the loss is even smaller. This is why they are accepted without difficulty and why copper is exchanged for small silver coins above the weight and intrinsic value of copper within a state. But not with other states because each state has the wherewithal to carry on its small exchanges with its own copper coins. Gold and silver, like copper, have a value proportional to the land and labor necessary for their production. If the public assumes the cost of minting these metals, their value as bars and coins is identical. Their market value and their mint value are the same. And their value in the state and in foreign countries is always alike, depending on the weight and fineness. That is on weight alone if the metals are pure and without alloy. Silver mines have always been found to be more abundant than those of gold, but not equally in all countries or at all times. Several ounces of silver have always been needed to buy 1 ounce of gold, sometimes more and sometimes less, according to the abundance of these metals and the demand for them. In the year AUC 310, 443 BC, 13 ounces of silver were needed in Greece to buy an ounce of gold, i.e., gold was to silver as 1 to 13. AUC 400, 353 BC or thereabouts, 1 to 12. AUC 460, 393 BC, 1 to 10 in Greece, Italy, and the whole of Europe. This ratio of 1 to 10 seems to have persisted for 3 centuries to the death of Augustus, AUC 767 or 14 AD. Under Tiberius, gold became scarce or silver more plentiful, and the ratio gradually rose to 1 to 12, 12.5, and 13. Under Constantine, 330 AD, and Justinian, 550 AD, it was 1 to 14.5. Later history is more obscure. Some authors think it was 1 to 18 under certain French kings. In 840 AD under Charles the Bald, gold and silver coins were struck at 1 to 12. Under St. Louis, who died in 1270, the ratio was 1 to 10. In 1361, 1 to 12. In 1421, over 1 to 11. In 1500, under 1 to 12. About 1600, 1 to 12. In 1641, 1 to 14. In 1700, 1 to 15. In 1730, 1 to 14.5. The quantity of gold and silver brought from Mexico and Peru in the last century has not only made these metals more plentiful, but has also increased the value of gold compared to silver, which has been more abundant, so that in the Spanish mints following the market prices, the ratio is fixed at 1 to 16. The other European states have closely followed the Spanish price in their mints, some at 1 to 15 and 7/8, others at 15 and 3/4, 15 and 5/8, etc., following the ideas and views of the directors of the mints. But since Portugal has drawn great quantities of gold from Brazil, the ratio has begun to fall again, if not in the mints, at least in the markets, and this gives a greater value to silver than in the past. Moreover, a good deal of gold is often brought from the East Indies in exchange for silver sent there from Europe, because the ratio is much lower in India. In Japan, where abundant silver mines are found, the ratio of gold to silver is today 1 to 8. In China, 1 to 10. In the other countries this side of the Indies, 1 to 11, 1 to 12, 1 to 13, and 1 to 14 as we get nearer to the West and to Europe. But if the mines of Brazil continue to supply so much gold, the ratio may eventually fall to 1 to 10, even in Europe, which seems natural to me. If anything but chance is the guide for the ratio. When the Roman Republic exploited all the gold and silver mines in Europe, Asia, and Africa, the ratio of 1 to 10 was the most consistent. If all the gold mines regularly produced a tenth of what the silver mines produce, the ratio between these two metals would not necessarily be 1 to 10. The ratio always depends on the demand and on the market price. Rich people might prefer to carry gold coins in their pockets rather than silver, or they might develop a taste for gildings and gold ornaments rather than silver, thus increasing the market price of gold. Neither could the ratio between these metals be determined by considering the quantity found in a state. Assume that the ratio is 1 to 10 in England, and that the quantity of gold and silver in circulation is 20 million ounces of silver and 2 million ounces of gold. That would be equal to 40 million ounces of silver. Now assume that 1 million ounces of gold are exported from England out of the 2 million, and 10 million ounces of silver are imported in exchange. There would then be 30 million ounces of silver and only 1 million ounces of gold, still equivalent in all to 40 million ounces of silver. If there are 30 million ounces of silver and 1 million ounces of gold, and if the quantity of the two metals decided the ratio, it would be 1 to 30, but that is impossible. The ratio in the neighboring countries is 1 to 10, and it would therefore cost only 10 million ounces of silver, with a little extra for the cost of transportation, to bring back 1 million ounces of gold to the state in exchange for 10 million ounces of silver. Therefore, to determine the ratio between gold and silver, the market price is alone decisive. The number of those who need one metal in exchange for the other, and of those who are willing to make such an exchange determines the ratio. It often depends on the attitudes of men. The bargaining is done approximately and not geometrically. But I do not believe that one can imagine any rule but this one to determine the ratio. At least we know that in practice it is the one which decides, as in the price and value of everything else. Foreign markets affect the price of gold and silver more than they do the price of any other goods or merchandise, because nothing is transported with greater ease and less waste. If there were a free and regular trade between England and Japan, and if a number of ships were regularly employed in this trade, and the balance of trade were in all respects equal, i.e. if the goods exported from England to Japan were equal to the goods imported from Japan in terms of price and value, it would cause gold to be exported from Japan in exchange for silver, and the ratio between gold and silver in Japan would be made the same as it is in England, subject only to the risks of navigation, because the cost of transportation is assumed here to be paid by the trade in goods. Taking the ratio at 1 to 15 in England and 1 to 8 in Japan, there would be more than 87% to gain by carrying silver from England to Japan and bringing back gold. But this difference is not enough to pay for the costs of such a long and difficult voyage. It pays better to bring back merchandise from Japan rather than gold in exchange for silver. It is only the costs and risk of the transport of gold and silver that can make a difference in the ratio between these metals in different states. In the nearest state, the ratio will differ very little, with a difference from one state to another of 1, 2, or 3%. But from England to Japan, the total of all these differences will amount to more than 87%. It is the market price which decides the ratio of the value of gold to that of silver. The market price is the base for this proportion in the value assigned to gold and silver coins. If the market price varies considerably, the coinage must be reformed to follow the market rate. If this is not done, confusion and disorder will emerge because the price of one or the other metal coins will rise above its specified monetary value. There are an infinite number of examples of this in antiquity. There is a quite recent one in England under the laws made at the London Mint. There, an ounce of silver, 11/12 fine, was worth 5 shilling 2 pence sterling. Since the ratio of gold to silver, which had been fixed at 1 to 16 in imitation of Spain, has fallen to 1 to 15 and 1 to 14.5, an ounce of silver sold at 5 shillings 6 pence sterling, while the gold guinea continued to circulate at 21 shillings 6 pence sterling. This caused the export from England of all the silver crowns, shilling, and sixpences which were not worn by circulation. Silver money became so scarce in 1728, only the most worn pieces remained, that people had to exchange a guinea at a loss of nearly 5%. The trouble and confusion thus produced in trade and circulation forced the Treasury to request that the celebrated Sir Isaac Newton, director of the Tower Mint, make a report on the measures he thought most suitable to remedy this chaos. Nothing could have been easier. It only required following the market price of silver in coining silver at the Tower. Whereas the ratio of gold to silver was traditionally by the laws and regulation of the Tower Mint, set at 1 to 15 3/4, it was only necessary to make the silver coins lighter in the proportion of the marketplace, which had fallen below 1 to 15. And then to anticipate the changes which the gold from Brazil would bring in the ratio between these two metals. It might even have been possible to fix it on the basis of 1 to 14.5, as was done in 1725 in France, as they will be forced to later do in England. It is true that the coinage in England might equally have been adjusted to the market price and ratio by diminishing the nominal value of gold coins. This was the policy adopted by Sir Isaac Newton in his report, and by the Parliament in response to this report. But as I shall explain, it was the least natural and the most disadvantageous policy. Firstly, it was more natural to raise the price of silver coins, because the public had already done so in the market. The ounce of silver, which was worth only 62 pence sterling at the mint, was worth more than 65 pence in the market, and all the silver money was being exported except for the coins that were considerably reduced in weight due to wear in circulation. On the other hand, it was less disadvantageous to the English nation to raise the silver money than to lower the gold money when considering the sums that England owes to foreigners. It is assumed that England owes foreigners 5 million sterling of capital invested in the public funds. It may be equally assumed that foreigners paid this amount in gold at the rate of 21 shillings 6 pence a guinea, or in silver at 65 pence sterling the ounce, according to the market price. These 5 millions have therefore cost foreigners 4,651,163 guineas at 21 shillings 6 pence per guinea. But now that the guinea is reduced to 21 shilling, the capital to be repaid is 4,761,904 guineas, a loss to England of 110,741 guineas, without counting the loss on the annual interest paid. Newton told me in answer to this objection that according to the fundamental laws of the kingdom, silver was the true and only monetary standard, and that as such it could not be altered. It is easy to answer that the public has altered this law by their practice and the price of the market, and therefore it had ceased to be a law. Under these circumstances, there was no need to adhere scrupulously to it to the detriment of the nation and to pay foreigners more than their due. If gold had not been considered true money, it would have adjusted to the change, as in Holland and China, where gold is considered merchandise rather than money. If the silver coins had been raised to their market price without touching gold, there would have been no loss to the foreigners, and there would have been plenty of silver coins in circulation. They would have been coined at the mint, whereas now no more will be coined until some new arrangement is made. By reducing the value of gold, brought about by Newton's report from 21 shillings 6 pence to 21 shillings, an ounce of silver which was sold in the London market before at 65 pence and 65.5 pence, only truly sold at 64 pence. But as it was coined at the Tower, an ounce was valued in the market at 64 pence, and if it was taken to the Tower to be coined, it would be worth no more than 62 pence. So no more was taken there. A few shillings or fifths of crown have been struck at the expense of the South Sea Company, losing the difference of the market price. But they disappeared as soon as they were put into circulation. Today, no silver coins of full mint weight can be seen in circulation. Only worn coins that do not exceed the market price in weight are circulating. However, the value of silver continues to rise imperceptibly in the market. The ounce, which was worth only 64 pence after the reduction of which we have spoken, has risen again to 65.5 and 66 in the market. And in order to have silver coins in circulation and coined at the Tower, it would be necessary again to reduce the value of the gold guinea from 21 shillings to 20 shillings, and to lose to foreigners double of what is already lost, unless it is decided to follow the natural course and to adjust silver coins to the market price. Only the market price can set the ratio of the value of gold and silver, as is the case for all other values. Newton's reduction of the guinea to 21 shillings was designed only to prevent the disappearance of the light and worn coins which remained in circulation, and not to fix gold and silver coins on the true ratio of their price. I mean by their true ratio that which is fixed by market prices. This price is always the touchstone in these matters. Its variations are slow enough to allow time to regulate the mints and prevent disorders in the circulation. In some centuries, the value of silver rises slowly against gold, while in others the value of gold rises against silver. This was the case in the age of Constantine, who reduced all values to that of gold as the more permanent. However, the value of silver is generally the more permanent, and gold is more subject to variation. Chapter 5. The Augmentation and Diminution of the Denomination of Money. Abstract. Raising and lowering the nominal value of money is shown not to undermine the theory of the value of money. In contrast, such measures are shown to be methods by which the prince acquires resources by deceiving individuals about the value of money. The process causes chaos in the market. According to the principles we have established, the quantity of money in circulation fixes and determines the price of everything in a state, taking into account the speed of circulation. We often see, however, in the augmentations and diminutions practiced in France, such strange variations that it might be assumed that market prices correspond to the coin's nominal value rather than to its quantity in exchange. The quantity of livres tournois in the money of account rather than the quantity of marks and ounces, and this seems directly opposed to our principles. Assume, as happened in 1714, that the 1 ounce silver coin, the écu, which was valued at 5 livres, is lowered by an order of the king at a rate of 1% per month over a period of 20 months, to a nominal value of 4 livres instead of 5. Let us see what will be the natural consequences of this with respect to the genius of the nation. All those who owe money will quickly pay their debts so as not to lose by the diminutions. Entrepreneurs and merchants find it easy to borrow money so that even the least able and the least creditworthy will expand their business. They borrow money with what they believe is no interest and load themselves with merchandise at current prices. The strength of their demand even causes prices to rise. These merchants then find they have a hard time selling their merchandise for money that is losing its nominal value. They even turn towards foreign merchandise and import considerable quantities of it for the consumption of several years. All this causes money to circulate more rapidly and raises the price of everything. Then, high prices prevent the foreigner from importing merchandise from France as usual. France keeps her own merchandise and at the same time imports great quantities. This double operation is the reason why considerable amounts of specie must be sent abroad to pay the balance. The exchange rates never fail to show this disadvantage. Exchange rates are commonly seen at 6 and 10% against France during these diminutions. Informed people in France hoard their money during these times. The king finds means to borrow a large amount of money on which he willingly loses from the diminution because he plans to compensate himself by an augmentation at the end of the diminutions. To this end, after several diminutions, they begin to hoard money in the king's treasury by postponing payments, pensions, and army pay. In these circumstances, money becomes extremely rare at the end of the diminutions, both because of the sums hoarded by the king and various individuals, and because the nominal value of the coin is diminished. The amounts sent abroad also contribute greatly to the scarcity of money, and this scarcity gradually reduces the prices of the merchandise, which entrepreneurs had stocked up on, by 50 or 60% below the prices prevailing at the time of the first diminutions. Circulation, i.e. the economy, falls into convulsions. Hardly enough money can be found to send to market. Many entrepreneurs and merchants go bankrupt, and their merchandise is sold at bargain prices. Then the king increases anew the coinage, setting the new écu, or new issue of 1-ounce silver coins, equal to 5 livres, and begins to use this new coinage to pay the troops and the pensions. The old coins are taken out of circulation and received at the mint at a lower nominal value, and therefore the king profits by the difference. But all the sums of new coinage that come from the mint do not restore the abundance of money in circulation. The amounts kept hoarded by individuals and those sent abroad greatly exceed the nominal increase on the coinage that comes from the mint. The cheapness of goods in France begins to draw in money from foreigners who find them 50 or 60 or more % cheaper, so gold and silver are sent to France to buy them. In this way, the foreigner who sends bullion to the mint easily recoups the fees paid at the mint. He finds the double advantage of the low price of the goods he buys, and the loss of the mint charge really falls on the French in the sale of their goods to the foreigners. They have enough merchandise for several years' consumption. They resell to the Dutch, for example, the spices which they bought from them for 2/3 of what they paid. All this takes place gradually, and the foreigner decides to buy these goods from France only because of their cheapness. The balance of trade which was against France at the time of the diminutions turn in her favor at the time of the augmentation, and the king is able to profit by 20% or more on all the bullion brought into France and taken to the mint. As foreigners now owe a trade balance to France and do not have in their country coins of the new issue, they must take their bullion and coins of the old issue to the mint to obtain new coins for payment. But this trade balance which foreigners owe to France arises only from the goods that they import from it at low prices. France is all around the dupe of these operations. She pays very high prices for foreign goods during the diminutions and sells them back to the same foreigners at very low prices at the time of the augmentation. She sells her own merchandise at low prices, which she had kept so high during the diminutions, and so it would be difficult for all the money which left France during the diminutions to come back during the augmentation. If coins of the new issue are counterfeited abroad, as is nearly always the case, France loses the 20% which the king has established as the mint charge. The gain goes again to the foreigner, who also profits by the low prices of goods in France. The king makes a considerable profit by the mint tax, but it costs France 3 times as much to enable him to make this profit. It is well understood that when there is a current balance of trade in favor of France against the foreigner, the king is able to raise a tax of 20% or more by a new coinage and an increase in the nominal value of coins. But if the trade balance was against France at the time of this new coinage and augmentation, the operation would have no success and the king would not derive a great profit from it. The reason is that in this case, it is necessary to continually send money abroad. But the old écu is as good as the new in foreign countries. That being so, Jews and bankers will give a premium or bonus in secret for the old coins, and the individual who can sell them above the mint price will not take them there. At the mint, they give him only about 4 livres for his écu, but the banker will give him at first 4 livres 5 sol, and then 4 livres 10, and at last 4 livres 15. And this is how it may happen that an augmentation of the coinage may lack success. It can hardly happen when the augmentation is made after the diminution is indicated, because then the balance naturally turns in favor of France, as we have explained. The experience of the augmentation of 1726 may serve to confirm all this. The diminutions that had preceded this augmentation were made suddenly and without warning, which prevented the ordinary operation of diminutions. This prevented the trade balance from turning strongly in favor of France at the augmentation of 1726. Few people took their old coins to the mint, and the profit of the mint tax, which was in view, had to be abandoned. It is not within my subject to explain the reasoning of public administrators for lowering the coinage suddenly, nor the reasons that deceived them in their project of the augmentation of 1726. I have mentioned the increases and decreases in France only because their results seem to sometimes clash with the principles I have established, in that the abundance or scarcity of money in a state raises or lowers all prices proportionally. After explaining the effects of lowering and raising the coinage as practiced in France, I maintain that they neither destroy nor weaken my principles. If I am told that what cost 20 livres or 5 ounces of silver before the lowering described above does not even cost 4 ounces or 20 livres of the new money after the augmentation, I will assent to this without departing from my principles, because, as I have just explained, there is less money in circulation than there was before the diminutions. The difficulties of exchange during the times of these operations cause variations in the prices of things and the interest rate on money, which cannot be taken as a rule in the ordinary principles of circulation and exchange. The change in the nominal value of money has always been brought about by some disaster or famine in the state, or by the ambition of some prince or individuals. In the year 157 AUC, 596 BC, Solon increased the nominal value of the drachma of Athens after a sedition and abolition of debt. Between 490 and 512 AUC, 263 to 241 BC, the Roman Republic increased the nominal value of its copper coins several times, so that their as, i.e. coin, came to be worth 6. The pretext was to provide for the needs of the state and to pay the debts incurred in the First Punic War. This did not fail to cause great confusion. In 663 AUC, 90 BC, Livius Drusus, tribune of the people, increased the nominal value of coins by 1/8, reducing its fineness by the same, which gave counterfeiters an occasion to introduce confusion into the economy. In 712 AUC, 41 BC, Mark Antony increased the nominal of silver by 5% by mixing iron with the silver in order to meet the needs of the triumvirate. Many emperors subsequently debased or increased the nominal value of their coins. The kings of France at different times have done likewise. This is why the livre tournois, which was once worth 1 pound of silver, has sunk to so little value. These proceedings have never failed to cause disorder in states. The nominal value of coins matters little or not at all, provided it be permanent. The pistole of Spain is worth 9 livres or florin in Holland, about 18 livres in France, 37 livres 10 sols in Venice, 50 livres in Parma. Values are exchanged between these different countries in the same proportion. The price of everything increases gradually when the nominal value of coins increases. The actual quantity in terms of weight and fineness of the coins is the base and regulator of values, taking into account the rapidity of circulation. A state neither gains nor loses by the raising or lowering of the nominal value of these coins, so long as it keeps the quantity of them the same, though individuals may gain or lose depending on their circumstances. People are full of false prejudices and misconceptions about the nominal value of their coins. We have shown in the chapter on exchanges that the price and fineness of the coins of different countries, mark for mark and ounce for ounce, is what ultimately rules. If an increase or decrease of the nominal value changes this rule for a time in France, it only causes a temporary crisis or time of difficulty in trade. It always returns, little by little, to intrinsic values, on which prices are necessarily established, both in the market and in foreign trade. Chapter 6. Banks and their credit. Abstract. Fractional reserve banking is a system where the banks lend some of their deposits and earn interest. This increases the amount of money in circulation compared to warehouse or 100% reserve banking. This utility of banking comes at the risk of being unable to withdraw your deposits. The amount that can be lent into circulation depends on the type of bank and the needs of the depositors. There are goldsmith bankers, the typical banker who issues banknotes, and the national bank. If 100 thrifty gentlemen or property owners who save money every year to occasionally buy land deposit 10,000 ounces of silver with a goldsmith or banker in London, they will receive in return notes payable on demand. They do this to avoid the trouble of keeping this money in their houses and to prevent thefts. They will often leave their money there for a long time, and when they make a purchase, they will notify the banker sometime in advance to have their money ready when the formalities and legal documents are complete. In these circumstances, the banker will often be able to lend throughout the year 90,000 ounces of the 100,000 he owes and will only need to keep on hand 10,000 ounces to meet all the withdrawals. He deals with wealthy and economical persons, so as fast as 1,000 ounces is demanded of him from one hand, another 1,000 is brought to him from another hand. It is enough, as a rule, for him to keep on hand 1/10 of his deposits. There have been examples and experiences of this in London. Instead of the individuals in question keeping on hand the greatest part of 100,000 ounces all year round, the custom of depositing it with a banker causes 90,000 ounces of the 100,000 to be put back into circulation. This is the primary idea one can derive regarding the utility of this sort of bank. The bankers or goldsmiths contribute to the acceleration of the circulation of money. They lend it out at interest at their own risk and peril, and yet they are, or ought to be, always ready to cash their notes on demand. If an individual needs to pay 1,000 ounces to another, he will give him a banker's note for that amount. This other person will perhaps not demand the money of the banker. He will keep the note and later give it to a third person in payment, and this note may pass through several hands for large payments, and for a long time without anyone demanding the money from the banker. It will be only someone who does not have complete confidence or someone who has several small sums to pay who will demand the money. In this first example, the cash reserve of a banker is only 1/10 of his business. If 100 individuals or property owners deposit their income with a banker every 6 months as it is received, and then demand their money back when they have a need to spend it, the banker will be in a position to lend much more of the money than he owes and receives at the beginning of the half years, for a short term of some months, than he will be toward the end of these periods. And his experience with the conduct of his clients will teach him that he can hardly lend during the whole year more than about 1/2 of the sums that he owes. Bankers of this kind will see their credit ruined if they fail for one instant to redeem the notes on their first presentation. When they are short of cash on hand, they will give anything to obtain money immediately. That is to say, they will pay a much higher interest rate than they receive on the sums they have lent. Hence, they make it a rule, based on their experience, to always keep enough money on hand to meet demands, and more rather than less. Many bankers of this kind, and they are the greatest in number, always keep on hand half the amounts deposited with them and lend the other half at interest and put it into circulation. In this second example, the banker causes his notes of 100,000 ounces or écus to circulate with 50,000 écus. If he has a great flow of deposits and great credit, it increases confidence in his notes and makes people less eager to cash them. However, it only delays his payments a few days or weeks, or until the notes fall into the hands of persons who are not accustomed to dealing with him. He ought to always manage his business according to the practices of those who are accustomed to entrust their money to him. If his notes fall into the hands of those in his own business, i.e. banking, they will immediately want to withdraw the money from him. If those who deposit money with the banker are entrepreneurs and merchants who regularly deposit large sums and soon thereafter draw them out, it will likely be the case that if the banker diverts more than 1/3 of his cash, he will find it difficult to meet these demands. It is easy to understand by these examples that the sums of money which a goldsmith or a banker can lend at interest or divert from his cash are naturally proportional to the practices and conduct of his clients. While we have seen bankers who were safe with a cash reserve of 1/10, others must keep nearly 1/2 or even 2/3, though their credit might be as good as that of the first. Some trust one banker, some another. The most fortunate is the banker whose clients are rich gentlemen looking for a safe place for their money without wishing to invest it at interest while they wait. A general national bank has this advantage over the bank of a single goldsmith because there is always more confidence in it. The largest deposits are willingly brought to it even from the most remote quarters of the city, and this generally leaves small bankers with only the deposits of petty sums from their neighborhood. Even the revenues of the state are deposited in it in countries where the prince is not absolute, and this, far from injuring credit and confidence in it, only serves to increase them. If payments in a national bank are made by transfers or book credits, the advantage is that they are not subject to forgeries. But if the bank issues notes, false notes may be made and cause chaos. There will also be a disadvantage for those in the city who live far from the bank and who would rather pay and receive in money and not travel to the bank. This is especially so for those who live in the country. But if the bank notes are dispersed, they can be used near and far. In the national banks of Venice and Amsterdam, payment is only made in book credits. But in the one in London, it is made in credits, in notes, and in money according to individual preferences. Today, London is the strongest bank. Therefore, it should be understood that the advantage of all banks in a city, public or private, is to accelerate the circulation of money and to prevent so much of it from being hoarded as it would naturally be for long time intervals. Chapter 7. Further explanations and enquiries as to the utility of a national bank. Abstract. National banks are of little utility and can be the source of economic chaos. The increase in the supply of money that they provide is relatively small and offers the same disadvantages as increases in real money. They are therefore unnecessary and potentially very harmful, as in the cases of the Bank of Venice and the Bank of London. The roles of legal tender laws, fractional reserve banking, and regional trade fairs are described. It is of little importance to examine why the Bank of Venice and that of Amsterdam keep their books and moneys of account different from current, i.e. silver coin, money, and why there is always a fee for converting these book credits into currency. It is not a point of any usefulness for circulation. The Bank of London has not followed them in this regard. Its accounts, notes, and payments are made and are kept in current coins, which seem to me more uniform, more natural, and no less useful. I have not been able to obtain accurate information about the quantities of money ordinarily brought to these banks, nor the amount of their notes and accounts, loans, and sums kept as reserve. Someone who is better informed on these points will be better able to discuss them. However, I know fairly well that these sums are not as large as commonly assumed, so I will briefly discuss the subject. Assume that the bills and notes of the Bank of London, which seems to me the most considerable, amount to a weekly average of 4 million ounces of silver, or about 1 million sterling. If they regularly keep a quarter of the 250,000 pounds sterling, or 1 million ounces of silver in coins in reserve, the utility of this bank to the circulation corresponds to an increase of the money of the state of 3 million ounces, or 750,000 pounds sterling, which is without doubt a very large sum and of very great utility for the circulation when it needs to be accelerated. However, I have noted elsewhere, example Part 2, Chapter 8, that there are cases where it is better for the welfare of the state to slow down the circulation rather than to accelerate it. I have heard that the notes and bills of the Bank of London have risen in some cases to 2 million sterling, but it seems to me this can only have been by extraordinary accident. And I think the utility of this bank corresponds in general to only about 1/10 of all the money in circulation in England. If the general explanations I received in 1719 about the revenues of the Bank of Venice are correct, it may be said that the utility of national banks generally does not match 1/10 of the money circulating in a state. This is more or less what I've learned. The revenues of the state in Venice may amount annually to 4 million ounces of silver, which must be paid in banknotes, and the collectors hired for that purpose, who receive money at Bergamo and in the most distant places for taxes, have to change it into banknotes when they make the payments to the Republic. In Venice, all payments for contracts, purchases and sales above a certain modest sum, must by law be made in banknotes. Therefore, all the retailers who have collected money in their business are compelled to buy banknotes to make large payments. Those who need money for their expenses or retail purchases have to sell their banknotes for money. The sellers and buyers of banknotes are usually equal when the total of all the credits or accounts on the bank's books do not exceed the value of approximately 800,000 ounces of silver. Time and experience, according to my informant, provided this knowledge to the Venetians. When the bank was first set up, individuals brought their money there to have credit at the bank for the same value. The money that was deposited at the bank was later spent on the needs of the Republic, i.e. the government, and yet banknotes preserved their original value because there were as many people needing to buy them as those needing to sell them. Finally, the state, in need of money, gave credits to war contractors in banknotes instead of silver, doubling the amount of its credits. Then, with the number of sellers of banknotes being much greater than the numbers of buyers, the notes began to lose value and fell 20% against silver. By this discredit, the revenue of the Republic fell by 1/5, and the only remedy found for this chaos was to pledge part of the state's revenues to borrow banknotes at interest. With these loans of banknotes, half of them were canceled, and then with the sellers and buyers being about equal, the bank regained its original credit, and the total of banknotes was brought back to 800,000 ounces of silver. In this manner, it has been ascertained that the usefulness of the Bank of Venice, in terms of money in circulation, corresponds to about 800,000 ounces of silver. If we assume that all the money in the states of that republic amount to 8 million ounces of silver, the usefulness of the bank corresponds to 1/10 of that silver. A national bank in the capital of a great kingdom or state must, it seems, contribute less to the circulation than one in a small state because of its distance from the provinces. When money circulates in greater abundance than among its neighbors, a national bank does more harm than good. An abundance of fictitious and imaginary money causes the same disadvantages as an increase of real money in circulation by raising the price of land and labor, or by changing the value of money and goods only to cause subsequent loss. This furtive or unnatural abundance vanishes at the first gust of scandal and precipitates economic chaos. Toward the middle of the reign of Louis XIII, 1638 to 1715, there was more money in circulation in France than in neighboring countries, and the king's revenue was collected without the help of the bank, as easily and conveniently as it is collected today in England with the help of the Bank of London. If exchanges in Lyon during one of its 4 trading fairs amounted to 80 millions of livres, and if they are begun and finished with 1 million in cash money, they are certainly of great convenience. Because everyone is in the same location, an infinite number of transactions can take place, and it saves the expense of transporting silver from one place to the other. Normally, it might take 3 months for the same million of cash to conduct 80 million in payments. The Paris bankers have often observed that the same bag of money has come back to them 4 or 5 times in the same day when they had a good deal to pay out and receive. I think that public banks are useful in small states and in those where silver is rather scarce, but of little utility in giving a solid advantage to a large state. The Emperor Tiberius, a strict and economical leader, saved 2.7 billion sesterces, equal to 25 million sterling, or 100 million ounces of silver, in the imperial treasury. This was an enormous sum for those times and even for today. It is true that in tying up so much money, he disturbed the circulation and silver became scarcer in Rome than it had ever been. Tiberius, who attributed the scarcity to the monopoly of contractors and financiers who farmed the empire's revenues, i.e. private tax collectors, ordered by an edict that they should buy land with at least 2/3 of their capital. Instead of stimulating the circulation of money, his edict threw it completely into chaos. All the financiers hoarded and called in their capital under the pretext of putting themselves into a position to obey the edict by buying land, which, instead of rising in value, sunk to a much lower price owing to the scarcity of silver in circulation. Tiberius remedied the scarcity by lending to individuals on good security, but only 300 million sesterces, or 1/9 of the money he had in his treasury. If the 1/9 part of the treasury sufficed in Rome to re-establish the circulation, it would seem that the establishment of a general bank in a great kingdom where its utility would never correspond to 1/10 of the money in circulation, when it is not hoarded, would be of no real and permanent advantage, and when considered for its intrinsic value, it can only be regarded as a mean for saving time. However, a real increase in the quantity of circulating money is of a different nature. We have covered this before in Part 2, Chapter 6, and Tiberius' treasury gives us another opportunity to touch the subject. This treasure of 2.7 billion of sesterces left at the death of Tiberius was squandered by his successor, Emperor Caligula, in less than a year. Money was never seen so abundant in Rome. What was the result? All this money plunged the Romans into luxury and into all sorts of crimes to pay for it. More than 600,000 pounds sterling left the empire every year to buy merchandise from the Indies, and in less than 30 years the empire grew poor and silver became very scarce, without the loss of a single province. Though I consider that a general bank is not of great utility in a large state, I allow that there are circumstances in which a bank may have effects that seem astonishing. In a city where there are public debts for considerable amounts, the presence of a bank enables one to buy and sell capital stock in an instant and for enormous sums, without causing any disturbance in the circulation. In London, if a person sells his South Sea stock to buy stock in the bank or in the East India Company, or hoping that in a short time he will be able to buy at a lower price stock in the same South Sea Company, he always takes banknotes and will generally not ask for money in exchange for these notes except for the value of the interest. Capital is hardly ever spent, so there is no need to change it into coins. But one does need to ask the bank for money to live on because cash is needed for small transactions. If a property owner who has 1,000 ounces of silver pays 200 ounces for the ownership of public stock to earn interest and spends 800 ounces for himself, the 1,000 ounces will always require coins. This owner will spend 800 ounces and the owner of the stocks will spend 200 of them. But when these owners are in the habit of speculating, buying and selling public stocks, no silver is needed for these operations and banknotes suffice. If it were necessary to draw cash out of circulation to be used in these purchases and sales, it would amount to a great sum and would often impede the circulation. And if this were the case, stocks could not be sold and bought so often. The origin of this capital is money that is deposited in the bank and is rarely drawn out, such as when an owner of capital engages in transactions and needs cash. This explains why the bank keeps in reserve only 1/4 or 1/6 of the silver against which it issues notes. If the bank did not have the funds of this type of capital, it would, in the ordinary course of circulation, find itself compelled, like private banks, to keep half its deposits on hand to be solvent. It is true that we cannot determine from the bank books and from its operation the quantity of capital that passes through several hands in the sales and purchases made in Change Alley. These notes are often renewed at the bank and changed against others in purchases. But the experience of stock purchases and sales clearly shows that the quantity is considerable, and without these purchases and sales, the sums deposited at the bank would likely be smaller. This means that when a state is not in debt and has no need of purchases and sales of stock, the assistance of a bank will be less necessary and less important. In 1720, the shares of public stock in private companies in London, which were bubbles and scams, rose to the value of 800 million sterling. Yet, purchases and sales of such venomous stocks were carried out without difficulty by the quantity of notes of all kinds that were issued, and the same paper money was accepted in payment of interest. However, as soon as the idea of great fortunes induced many individuals to increase their expenses, to buy carriages or foreign linen and silk, cash was needed for all that, i.e. for the spending of interest, and this broke all the systems up in pieces. This example shows that the paper and credit of public and private banks may cause surprising results in everything which does not concern ordinary expenditure for drink, food, clothing, and other family requirements. In the regular course of the circulation, the help of banks and credit of this kind is much smaller and less solid than is generally assumed. Silver alone is the true lifeblood of circulation, i.e. the economy. Chapter 8. The Refinements of Credit of General Banks. Abstract. When the government's national bank inflates the money supply by increasing the supply of banknotes, it reduces the rate of interest and can increase the price of stocks. This is a corrupt process, and when the notes are redeemed, the price of stock falls and can result in bank runs and economic chaos. This is now known as the business cycle. The National Bank of London is composed of a large number of shareholders who elect a board of directors to govern its operations. Their main task consisted in making a yearly distribution of the profits from interest on the money lent against the bank deposits. Later, the public debt was incorporated with it, on which the state pays interest annually. In spite of such a solid foundation, once the bank had made large advances to the state and the holders of notes were apprehensive that the bank was in difficulties, a run on the bank took place and holders of notes went in crowds to withdraw money. The same thing happened during the collapse of the South Sea Company in 1720. The refinements introduced to support the bank and limit its discredit were first to set up a number of clerks to count out the money to those bringing in notes, to pay out large amounts in sixpences and shilling to gain time, and to pay some portion to individual holders who had been waiting all day to be paid. However, the most considerable sums were paid to friends who took them away and secretly brought them back to the bank only to repeat the same maneuver the next day. In this way, the bank saved its appearance and gained time until the panic abated. But when this did not suffice, the bank opened a stock subscription, engaging trusty and solvent people to join as guarantors of large amounts, in order to maintain the credit and circulation of the banknotes. It was by this last refinement that the credit of the bank was maintained in 1720 when the South Sea Company collapsed. As soon as it was publicly known that wealthy and powerful people were on the subscription list, the run on the bank ceased and deposits were brought in as usual. If a minister of state in England, seeking to lower the interest rate or for other reasons, increases the price of public stock in London, and if he has enough credit with the directors of the bank to get them to issue a quantity of banknotes without backing, under the obligation of indemnifying them in case of loss, begging them to use these notes to buy several blocks of shares of public stock, this stock's price will increase due to these operations. And those who have sold stock, seeing that high prices continue, will perhaps decide to buy it back at a higher price than they sold it for, so as not to leave their banknotes idle, and believing rumors that the interest rate will fall and that the stock's price will rise further. If several people imitate the agents of the banks and buy this stock, hoping to profit like them, the public funds will increase in price to the point that the minister wishes. And it may be that the bank will cleverly resell at a higher price all the stock purchased at the minister's request, and will not only make a large profit on it, but will retire and cancel all the extraordinary banknotes that were issued. If the bank alone makes the price of public stock rise by buying it, it will make it fall when it sells it in order to cancel its extraordinary notes. However, many individuals usually follow the agents of the bank in their operations and contribute in keeping the price high. Some of them get caught because they do not understand these operations, in which are found infinite refinements, or rather trickery, which lie outside my subject. It is then evident that a bank, with the complicity of a public administrator, is able to raise and support the price of public stock, and to lower the rate of interest in the state at the pleasure of this administrator. When the steps are taken discreetly, it can pay off the state's debts. But these refinements, which open the door to making large fortunes, are rarely carried out for the sole advantage of the state, and those who take part in them are generally corrupted. The excess banknotes made and issued on these occasions do not upset the circulation because they are used for the buying and selling of stock. They are not used for household expenses and are not exchanged into silver. But if some panic or unforeseen crisis drove note holders to demand silver from the bank, the bomb would burst and it would be seen that these are dangerous operations. The Mises Institute hopes you have enjoyed this audiobook. For a world of free market literature, media, and discussion, visit Mises.org.